Hello and welcome to another edition of the Waypoint podcast, where we give you Torah insights from the weekly Parsha. This week's is a fascinating one, Parsha Bamidbar, which is just the name of the book Numbers as we know it, but it's also the first portion. And in this portion, we go pretty deep into the military structure of the encampment of Israel. So the first thing that we get is the enumeration of the army of Israel. We get the details on the age requirements. It starts at age 20. And again, as I mentioned in a previous waypoint, we don't really get an end point, but I would imagine that 60 might be a good retirement age, as we see with previous discussions. We're then introduced to the camp layout and how it's supposed to be structured around the Mishkan, right? The tabernacle. We also then get a sense of the structure of the Levi encampment and the duties of the Levites. How to set up the Mishkan, and also how to break it down and how to move out. So, for those who are familiar with military terminology, you could sum up this parsha in, first of all, the overall total number of the army, and how to set up bivouac, the responsibilities of admin once bivouac is set up, and then how to break down and head out. So, with that said, my colleague Seamus, who is himself a military man, has an excellent lesson for us with respect to all of these matters. And so, with that said, I'll hand it over to him. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Parasha Bamidbar here on the Waypoint. So, I'm just going to jump right into it. Many of you may be familiar, if not, but of course, I'm Seamus, and some of you may be aware that I am a Marine. I've served so far 8 years in the Marine Corps, and so when reading this particular parasha, the reason I bring that up is because this Torah portion is really military focused, and so something about it personally just really talks to me in a way that I feel like makes sense to the military, personnel. And if you're not necessarily in the military, it's not that you can't understand these things. In fact, I'm going to do my best to help you understand what it is we see in this Torah portion. And so I'm just going to kind of give you guys a little bit of a background of how a military, system works, set up, some of the things that we do, and hopefully that will shed some light onto this Torah portion, because really I love this Torah portion. I feel like I say that about every Torah portion, but trust me, Torah is a great book, so you can't go wrong no matter what portion you're in. But as I said, I've been serving in the Marines so far 8 years, specifically as a combat engineer. For those of you who don't know, I basically work with a lot of explosives and counter explosive stuff like that, breaching mostly. And in the battalion that I was with, I was mostly a breacher. I also carried a shotgun with me just in case we needed to do any ballistic breaching into urban environments. And so I worked a lot with infantry, especially. I was in a division engineer unit. So things that I want to kind of talk about, though, is that we all have a sense of an idea. Just about everybody that I've talked to, at least in America, there's an idea that everyone seems to understand that the military has a sort of unique sense of camaraderie. And everybody is aware that the military has this unique sense of camaraderie. Even if you've never met a military man in your life, I'm sure you've read a book or seen a show or a movie somewhere where you can see that the military has a really unique sort of brotherhood or like a camaraderie. I hate saying the same word over and over again, but that's the idea: is this very unique sense of unity in a sort of family that's not one that you were born into, of course. And be that as it may, not everyone might be so familiar with a sort of the structure, I guess, of any particular given military unit. The biggest reason I want to talk about a little bit about this is we're talking about the census, okay? And when I was doing my read through, I stumbled upon Rashi's commentary talking about why God takes another census yet again. I think there are 9 major census taken of Israel 9 times throughout its history. This is just one of them. Of course, the 10th census is written in rabbinic literature as being during the Messianic age when Israel is gathered back. But this is one of the census that we are taking. And the reason that God takes a census, it's seemingly all the time, is because he cares. He genuinely is always concerned with the well-being of Israel. And so he's always counting, but you can't take a census of literally everybody. So in this case, we're taking a census of everyone of military age and their families. So we have a general idea of the size of Israel, but not a specific idea of the size of Israel. However, be that as it may, it is one of those things where, as a member of the military, things that we do all the time, that the movies don't necessarily capture, even books don't necessarily capture, is count. We constantly are counting. Every morning we wake up, we get in formation, and we count off. Especially if you're in boot camp, you literally count off. You count yourself number 1 at a time, all the way down the line. When it gets to you, you say your number, and it keeps going. Once you get into the fleet, you stop doing it that way, but you still get a count every single morning. Anytime a movement is being made, a major movement, especially if you're in the field and you do a hike, you'll get a count before you leave, and after you've arrived to your destination, you'll get another count. Make sure you have everybody. If you stop anywhere between the way, you'll stop and get a count and make sure you didn't lose anybody between here and there, even if it's just a breaking point. Before you bed down, you make sure everyone is present. You got a count. Everyone's eaten. You're doing your best to make sure that you have everybody, and these numbers are important. To us in the moment, it's some of the most boring thing ever, particularly because sometimes it takes more than one try to get all the counts done correctly. It's sort of a little joke that if you get the count right the first time, something's wrong. But it is incredibly important to do these counts every time, and it's largely because in the past it's happened that when we didn't do a count, somebody accidentally got left behind. Doesn't always happen, but just about every time somebody has been forgotten, left behind, and as a result may have met an untimely end, was almost 90% of the time in which it's happening, especially in a training environment, it's because numbers weren't taken correctly. Somebody forgot to do a count. And that's a failure in the leadership. And usually we sort of see that as the leadership not caring enough to make sure that his counts are good, or just a lack of specific oversight. Someone somewhere failed to care enough so that this slipped through the cracks, and so somebody got left behind. And by the time we figured it out, it was too late, unfortunately. So I resonate with Rashi when he says that God takes account so often because he cares. And of course, we are all familiar with God knows even the number of hairs on your head, the counting. So God, of course, cares about all of his people, all of his creation, not just in a military sense, but in a very real sense. But now that we've kind of gotten that out of the way, I want to go over just a little bit of a military layout for you, okay? The word for armies, plural in the Bible, is tzvaot. This is a word we're pretty familiar with. In fact, your Bible may say that, depending on your translation, it'll say Lord of hosts or the Lord of legions. master of legions, something along those lines. And it's translating that word, Tzvaot, which is essentially army, or armies plural. And I want to kind of modernize that translation a little bit, because it still seems kind of removed. We tend to think of these translations the way that they're worded when we read in the Bible. We tend to think of them as armies of angels, more or less. But I want to kind of change the way that we think about that. So in any army, you have of course, your individual, your soldier, the single person. The smallest unit that you could say is usually a team. A team can be anywhere between 2 and 4. If it's 4, and so I come from a Marine Corps perspective, so I'm going to give you a sort of rundown of the United States Marine Corps setup. A 4-man fire team is usually your smallest unit. Of course, you have a team leader. You have 3 to 4 fire teams in a squad. A squad is around about 12, 15, give or take, people, made up of 3 or 4 fire teams. A platoon is made up of 3 or 4 squads. And so a platoon, obviously we're talking bigger numbers here, anywhere between 50, 60, 70, depending on the particular unit, whether or not you have enough manpower. And so a platoon, from there you have 3 or 4 platoons, usually 4, in a company-sized element. A company is part of a battalion, and there are 4 companies to a battalion, 3 or 4, depending on the particular unit. And in a battalion, you have 3 battalions per regiment. And a regiment is about what we would consider the same size as a Roman legion, a regiment. And within, from there, you have 4 regiments within a division. And a division is just about the largest size of a coherent unit when it comes to the Marine Corps, particularly. And we have 4 divisions total, 3 active divisions, and the 4th division is the reserve unit. And so you can have the 1st Marine Division located on the West Coast with 4 regiments, each regiment containing 4 battalion, each battalion containing 4 units of companies, each company containing 4 platoons, each platoon containing 4 squads, each squad containing 4 fire teams. And there's a lot of counting there, and we usually count from the small unit to the large unit. With a bottom-up leadership style, so that we have a consensus and we know where anyone is at any given time. And the reason I taught you that little bit of information, if you didn't already know, is I want to change the way we think about Hashem, master of legions, because legion, again, sounds kind of Roman, kind of ancient. Instead, I want you to think of, and battalion is kind of small, but that's what it is. Hashem, master of regiments, of battalions, of divisions. And a division is about the same size. Again, this is Marine Corps. If you do Army has a slightly different setup than this. They're much larger than the Marine Corps, so they have a lot more to work with. But why does that matter? So God is the God of battalions, not just in the angelic sense, but for people like you and I. Okay, so specifically, when you join yourself to God, you become one of God's people. You become part of God's army. In Numbers, we're seeing that in a very literal sense. But in our daily lives, this is very much a spiritual sense, of course. In our battle is not with flesh and blood, so to speak. It is with the spiritual. But you should absolutely see yourself as being a member of God's army, of God's division. You belong in a battalion of God's. You fit somewhere within a company, a platoon, a fire team, a squad. You absolutely fit as a soldier in God's greater army. And the thing about being a soldier, of course, and anyone will tell you fun boot camp stories. I'm going to tell you one particularly. Boot camp is difficult, but it's mostly to help instill into you discipline, the kind of discipline that's necessary to be in the military. And so, they tell us all the time in boot camp, every little detail matters. It's relevant and it has its application somewhere. You don't understand it yet, but the reason we do every single thing that we do is for your benefit, for your military discipline, and it absolutely has application when you leave here. At first, we don't really believe this. We get to boot camp, we're just being screamed at all the time. We're being told to do some of the dumbest things, to include everything is regulated. Absolutely everything you do is regulated, to the point where, we would have to carry our cups. I'm just using this as an example, like this, right? With the first finger and our thumb at the very bottom of the cup. And every time you went to chow, this is how you had to carry your cup. And it seems so stupid. And you would be screamed at if you didn't carry it that way. But in retrospect, as you get further down towards the end of boot camp and you start doing drill manual, that holding the cup like that actually does have purpose. Specifically, when you go to pull the charging handle back on your weapon to do an inspection, to do a weapons inspection in a drill setting. And it's when you go to do it for the first time, if you've never done it before, it's incredibly difficult. You don't have the muscle finger strength or the muscle memory to actually pull it off. But over time, because we had constantly carried our cups like that, it actually built up the ability to make that a much easier portion of doing an inspection arms. And so that tiny little piece of detail of what we consider to be kind of useless discipline actually has a major part to play in the greater scheme of military bearing, discipline, and ultimately for your inspection arms, and performing the duties of your job. And going through that boot camp sets you up to get ready for. I went to School of Infantry after that, and that's you start to see more and more of those little things that you were doing at boot camp that you felt were a little useless. You now begin to see their value and their benefit. Once you are put into a simulated combat zone, you start to see that without those things, you would not be ready to handle the information being thrown at you, one, and two, be able to perform better, easier, the kind of jobs that are going to be demanded of you when you get to the field and ultimately into the field of battle. So that's what for us, for you as an individual, you are part of the army of Hashem. You are part of the battalion. You fit somewhere in the divisions. And of course, with that comes camaraderie. At least there should be, because we're all in this battle together. And we should absolutely see ourselves collectively as being part of this army, this greater organization, greater than ourselves, with a focused goal together in defeating the enemy. But with that comes individual biblical discipline, which is found in the Torah. And that's why the point I'm trying to get at is there are commands that we see in the Torah all the time that require a lot of discipline to upkeep. And we might not understand what their purpose is now. But come time for the field of battle, that's when the value might not always, but the value might show itself there when you finally find yourself in the midst of whatever particular spiritual battle. Any Marine will tell you, we train, for me, 8 years, and I've thank God never seen combat in real life. But so far I've trained 8 years of my life for 2 minutes of combat. And most soldiers do exactly that. They spend a lot of time developing the discipline and getting ready and training for ultimately what would end up happening in a just 2, 4, maybe 10-minute span of combat. And you need all of that training for just that short amount of time. And so that's what we are as the collective. The Bible is our spiritual discipline manual. It shows us everything that we need to do to show up ready for our spiritual combat as belonging in part of the army of God, as our in our battalions. There's a lot of army speech in the Bible. For example, Hineni is the Hebrew for "here I am," and you see this every time God calls out to one of the founding fathers. You find that they usually say Hineni, which is a military term. It's an answer to attention. It is a military response to the call attention. And so, in the American military, attend hut, and we usually don't reply back. But in the ancient military, Hineni is the received call of attention. And the Amida, when you stand your feet together and you pray the 3 daily prayers, you show up every morning, you stand at the position of attention. You are counted, right? In a minion, quite literally, you are counted. You are taking muster every morning, and you're getting ready to do your daily job as a soldier in the army of God. And daily, you work on policing your own and working on yourself and building up more and more discipline so that as you progress through the ranks, you are a more capable soldier for when the inevitable combat happens. Whether that combat be, of course, you're something daily as you overcome a particular sin, or something greater in which you face a something much more moral and larger in scope, to give you the mental and spiritual fortitude and discipline required to overcome the obstacles that we're going to find in the wilderness, which this book, Bamidbar, in Hebrew means in the wilderness. And that's where we train, and that's where the combat is. We train in the wilderness because the combat is in the wilderness. Right now, we're in exile. We're in the wilderness ourselves in our daily lives. This is our training ground. So every morning, put on the armor of God, just as Paul gave advice to do. Every morning, wake up, muster, put on the armor of God, stand at attention, say Hineni, be there for the count, for the muster, and ready to take on whatever daily activity you need to do to further your discipline as a soldier in the army of God, so that when the day comes, you are absolutely ready, and you will fall back on your training. You will never rise to the occasion. That's something we say in the Marines all the time. You never rise to the occasion. You always fall back on your training. So train daily, build up that discipline that's necessary, and remember this. You are part of an army. So really think of yourself in that way, and go forward with that kind of motivation, and build the camaraderie with your fellow brothers and sisters, because they are with you in combat arms, in spiritual combat arms, because they are also part of the army of God. And so build that camaraderie, be in a 4-man fire team, in a 12-man squad, right? 12 disciples, right? It's a squad. There's a lot of crossover, but that's partly why community is so important. It's almost impossible to build discipline on your own without somebody there to help you or do it with you. And so I also encourage that we see each other as being part of the greater army of God, in the greater battalion, training daily with our brothers side by side to build ourselves up as better soldiers, go into the world absolutely ready and disciplined to take whatever it is that's thrown at us. And now I'm going to hand it back over to my colleague, Brad, for his final thoughts. So thank you, and Godspeed.
Welcome back. And thank you, Seamus, for that very awesome lesson. This week's Haftarah is maybe a little more difficult to see where the connection is to the very military structure of how this book of the Torah opens. But I think that for me, where the connection was is it's fascinating. Seamus and I, we read these separately, and we come to the table with what we've learned. And for both of us this week, the inherent military nature of the Parsha is what came to mind. And so for our Haftarah, we get around to this conundrum for Jonathan and David, and I say for and not between, right? The conundrum's not between them. They're both of one mind and heart. in this situation that they find themselves in. And the situation is such where it's not really safe for David to return with Jonathan back to the palace where he would be expected to or have dinner with the king and with Jonathan, with the family. It's not safe at this point because King Saul has quite an animus against David. So Jonathan has to go and make sure whether or not it will be safe at any point for David to return, and if not, then David has to go somewhere much safer for himself. But towards the end of that, we get to a point where they both acknowledge a pact of sorts between them, as best friends, and that's really what I think this Haftarah really hones in on there at the end, is the closeness of the friendship that they had. And so, in continuing with the military theme, there's something that, for those of you who did serve, will be very familiar, and it's the battle buddy idea. The fact that even if you're operating within a larger squad, there's the one guy that was assigned to you in basic training, and that was your battle buddy. And even going into more broad service, that concept still follows through in certain very important and crucial jobs. So for a machine gunner, right, there is no one machine gunner, right? It's a team of two that operate the machine gun. One's job is to fire and, maneuver the weapon, while the other one's job is to reload the weapon and direct his fire, right? He's the one who's actually got eyes on the field, while the one who's actually pulling the triggers is not necessarily looking at the field as closely. So his buddy is the one who is directing his fire. And the other job that comes to mind is a sniper, right? So a sniper always has a spotter. They operate in teams of two, and these are two very crucial jobs in military service. And for these two jobs, these two men can have quite a significant impact in any battle or altercation or policing action or what have you. They're immensely important. And they depend on one another in this capacity. For the machine gunner, quite literally, Seamus and I were talking earlier about an example of the Guadalcanal, right, where a machine gunner was able to stave off quite a few of the enemy. So in this team of two, in the machine gun position, these two men can actually hold off quite a sizable force just with the two of them. And then with a team of snipers, it's a little bit of a different dynamic, but it's equally as paramount and important. And that kind of brings me around to, you may have your own strengths and your own personal areas where you excel. But you can't even begin to build an army without at least one other person, right? It's the smallest enumerator of a fighting force of multiple persons. Everybody needs their battle buddy, and in the army in which we serve, every single one of us needs our David or our Jonathan, depending on which respective role you may fill. Everybody needs that one person that is their battle buddy through this endeavor, right? Through this mission that we serve. And it's important to find, and it's difficult to find, right? We don't always click with everybody, but definitely keep an open mind and pray that Hashem will show you your battle buddy. This is something that even within Rabbinic Orthodox Judaism, this is something that's actually somewhat enforced on their own training level, because when you're in your studies, you get your chavruta, right? He's closer than a brother. He's somebody that is meant to study with you and challenge you and help you learn together. And that's something that everybody certainly needs. And that dynamic helps the greater army at whole function and move towards victory. And with that said, I'll go ahead and close out. Um, Definitely hope that this has enlightened and blessed you. Hope that this has given you something to chew on and think about. And if you liked this and want to see more, definitely hit the subscribe button. Ring that bell if you want to be updated when there's more content like this. Like the video, please, if you did. And also, you can subscribe to our Patreon or our website. Both are still up and functioning right now. We have plans to, at some point, migrate one to the other. But with that said, hope to see you next week. Shalom.